She handed me an invoice at dinner. $143,000. Said it was partial payment for the career I stole from her. By being born. Opening. The story I grew up inside. I was 7 years old the first time I understood that my existence was a problem. Not a problem anyone had said out loud, not in those exact words, but it was there, woven into the fabric of every conversation my mother and I ever had, stitched into the silences between her sentences, living in the particular tone she used when she talked about the life she used to have. The life before me. She was telling the story again that evening, the story I came to think of simply as the career, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my homework while she stood at the counter, her voice taking on that tone I already recognized at 7. The tone that meant we were going back to before. I was on my way up, she said, not really talking to me, more thinking aloud in my direction. My boss told me I was the best he'd ever seen. Director by 35, he said. I had plans. Real plans. She paused. And then you came along. That's the sentence I remember most clearly. Not its content. I'd hear it hundreds of times over the next 2 decades, but the way she said it. Then you came along. Like I had arrived uninvited. Like I had happened to her. I didn't know how to process that at 7. I just kept my head down and finished my homework and felt something I didn't have a name for yet, something that lived in my chest like a stone. It would be years before I understood that what I felt was guilt. Guilt for existing, guilt for the specific crime of having been born to someone who'd rather I understand what that had cost her. I'm 27 now. I own an apartment, $143,000, nothing extravagant, a 1-bedroom with original tile and a window that sticks in summer, but mine. I paid for it myself, same as everything else I've ever had. And recently, my mother asked me to give it to her. She said it was partial compensation for the $2 million career I stole from her by being born. This is the story of how I stopped apologizing for existing. Background. The mythology of the director track. Let me tell you the career as my mother tells it, because she tells it well. She's had nearly 3 decades of practice. Before I was born, she was climbing. She had started at a marketing firm at 24, gotten her footing, proven herself. By 28, when she got pregnant, she was a marketing coordinator, organized, ambitious, regarded highly by her team. Her boss, she always said, had spotted something in her. Director material. The corner office was a matter of time. Then she got pregnant. Then she made a choice, her word, always, her choice, to become a stay-at-home mother. She returned to work when I was 12, but re-entry after a 12-year absence is brutal, and she came back at entry level and never fully recovered the trajectory she'd left. She worked steadily until early retirement, but never reached the director title she'd been aiming for in her 20s. Her pension is modest. Her savings are thinner than she'd like. She divorced my father 5 years ago, which simplified her life in some ways and complicated it in others, financially especially. And throughout all of it, childhood, adolescence, my adult years, the divorce, the retirement, she has told the story. The career she was on track for. The director title that should have been hers. The $200,000 salary she would have earned by 35, the bonuses, the leadership, the respect. The life that existed perfectly, frictionlessly, in the space between what she was and what she might have become. I could have had it all, she told me once when I was maybe 15. I'd won a regional science competition and she'd hugged me, then stepped back and gotten that look. I could have won things too, you know, if I'd stayed in my career. I had that drive. I said, I know, Mom. Because that was always the answer. I know, Mom. I know what you gave up. I know what it cost you. I said it so many times it stopped meaning anything. It became a ritual response to a ritual story, both of us playing our parts. What I didn't say, at 15, was the question I was already carrying. If you're proud of raising me, why does it sound like a tragedy? The demand. When mythology became mathematics. The conversation I'd been dreading for years finally happened about 8 months ago. My mother had come to visit. We'd had dinner, which had gone fine. She's good company when she's not in the grief of the career, and there are whole hours where she's just my mother, funny and sharp and genuinely interested in my life. I'd made pasta. We'd talked about work. It was almost easy. Then she'd looked around the apartment, really looked, slowly, and something in her expression shifted. You've done well for yourself, she said. The tone was not entirely warm. I've worked hard, I said. She nodded. Then, do you ever think about what it cost? Getting here. Not just you, what it cost other people. And there it was. I felt the stone settle back into my chest, same as it had at 7. I'd been waiting for this moment. Part of me had known it was coming. The pitch took about 40 minutes and was clearly something she'd prepared. She'd done math, actual numbers on paper, which she produced from her purse. I stood in my own kitchen and watched my mother present me with an invoice for my birth. The argument went like this. Director's salary at 35 would have been approximately $200,000. Working from 35 to 65 is 30 years. Add projected bonuses, growth, promotions beyond director. She estimated career earnings of at least $2 million above what she had actually earned. The apartment, at $143,000, was less than 8% of that figure. "I'm not even asking for what you actually owe me," she said. "I'm asking for a symbolic acknowledgement. A gesture. A gesture. $143,000 as a gesture." "Mom," I said carefully, "that math assumes a lot of things. It assumes I was good at my job, which I was. It assumes you would have been promoted to director, which wasn't guaranteed." My boss said. "I know what your boss said. But being told you have potential at 28 isn't the same as a guaranteed 30-year trajectory to executive level. People get laid off. Companies restructure. Careers have setbacks. The $2 million is a best-case projection from an entry-level starting point." She looked at me the way she always looks at me when I push back on the career. Like I'm denying her something fundamental. Like my skepticism is a form of betrayal. "You don't want to acknowledge what I gave up," she said. "I want to be honest about what the numbers actually represent." The conversation ended badly. She left before the dishes were done. But something had shifted for me that night. Something that had been quiet for years had gotten loud. I drove to my therapist's office the next morning and said, for the first time out loud, "I think my mother wants me to pay her for being born, and I don't know how to handle it." My therapist said, "Let's start at the beginning." Update 1. Examining the logic. My therapist is the kind of person who lets you talk until you hear yourself. I talked for a lot of sessions about the career, about the guilt I'd grown up carrying, about the stone in my chest that had been there since I was 7. And then, carefully, she started asking me questions about the actual structure of the thing, not the emotional weight of it, but the logical architecture. "When your mother says she sacrificed her career for you," my therapist said, "what does she mean by sacrifice?" I thought about it. A choice she made. Staying home instead of working. And who made that choice? She did. Was she forced? No. She's always said it was her choice. She's used that word specifically, her choice. "So," my therapist said, "the person who made a voluntary choice about her own life is presenting that choice as a debt incurred by someone else." When she put it that way, the logic collapsed immediately. I don't know why I hadn't seen it as clearly before, but I think it's because when you grow up inside something you absorb its internal logic without questioning it. The career had its own gravity. You didn't examine it. You just felt its weight. She said I stole her career by being born. But babies don't steal things. They exist because their parents chose to create them. She made choices about her life and spent 27 years sending me the bill. That's not sacrifice. That's retroactive invoicing for decisions she made voluntarily. I started researching. Not aggressively, not with the intention of weaponizing what I found, but because I realized I'd been operating on the basis of a story I'd been told rather than facts I'd verified. I contacted my father, who lives about 2 hours away and whom I see every couple of months. We have a decent relationship, strained by the divorce and by years of navigating the complicated weather of my mother's resentments, but fundamentally solid. I asked him directly, had he pressured my mother to quit working when I was born? He was quiet for a moment. Then, no. Absolutely not. I told her I'd support whatever she wanted to do. I would have helped with childcare costs if she'd wanted to keep working. It was her decision. I never once told her she couldn't go back. Did she seem to want to keep working? Another pause. She was excited about staying home. At the time. It was later, when things got hard, that the story changed. I also did something that felt almost embarrassingly easy once I thought to do it. I looked at what her actual job had been when she got pregnant. She'd been with her company for 4 years. She was a marketing coordinator, not a manager, not on a director track in any official sense, not anywhere near the senior leadership trajectory she'd described. She'd been performing well. Her boss had likely said encouraging things. She had been, by any reasonable estimation, a solid mid-level employee with genuine potential and no promises. The $2 million she lost assumes a director promotion that was never promised, a 30-year career path with no setbacks, and no other life changes affecting her trajectory. She built a fantasy career and priced it at $2 million. My apartment is supposed to pay for her imagination. The mythical career had grown every year in the telling. The coordinator became the rising star. The encouraging boss became a prophet. The possible future became an inevitable one. And the price tag on that impossible, inflated future became the price tag on me. Update 2. The confrontation. I asked my mother if we could talk. She came for lunch on a Sunday, and I had decided to be honest. Not brutal, not surgical or cold, but honest. I was done managing the story by staying quiet. I want to talk about the apartment, I said, and about what you've told me my whole life. She set down her fork. All right. You were a marketing coordinator when you got pregnant. Not a rising director. Not on an executive track. You were doing well, but you were 4 years into your career and hadn't been promoted to management yet. Her expression tightened. I was told I had director potential. By your boss. Who may have meant it sincerely. But there's a long road between, you have potential, at 28, and, you would definitely have become a director with a $200,000 salary. That road includes things like restructuring, competition, economic downturns, and the basic reality that most people who have potential don't end up in executive roles. You're saying I didn't have it in me. I'm saying the future you lost was never certain. And I talked to Dad. A silence. He said staying home was your choice. Not his demand. He said he offered to support childcare if you wanted to keep working. He said you wanted to stay home, at the time. Things change, she said quietly. You can't know, when you make a choice, what you're giving up. I know. And I understand that the grief is real. I do. Losing a version of yourself, the version that went the other way, that's a real loss. I'm not dismissing it. She looked at me, and for a moment she just looked tired. Not angry. Tired and old and like someone carrying something heavy. But Mom, I said, that loss belongs to you. It's yours to process. I was a baby. I didn't make your career decisions. I didn't force you to stay home. You made choices, good faith choices about your life, and they turned out to have costs you didn't anticipate. That's a tragedy. But it's not my debt. Every mother sacrifices. Yes, I said. And most don't bill their children for it. Most don't spend 27 years preparing an invoice. Most understand that choosing to raise a child is a choice, not a loan. She chose. She regrets. But regret isn't a debt I owe. She didn't erupt the way I'd feared. She sat very still for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I just wanted to be something, she said. I just wanted to have been something. I know, I said. I'm sorry that feels so unresolved. But the answer to that isn't my apartment. Update 3. The weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. After that lunch, my mother and I didn't speak for 6 weeks. She called eventually, not to reopen the apartment conversation, just to call, cautiously, the way you call someone when things are fragile. We talked about the weather and her garden and a television series she'd started. We didn't mention the career. It was like talking across a lake, both of us on separate shores, shouting things that were safe. I spent those 6 weeks doing the harder work. The internal kind. My therapist gave me an exercise. Write down every accomplishment you're proud of, and then write beside each one how you described it to yourself at the time. Did you allow yourself to feel proud, or did you immediately attach it to something you owed? I sat with that exercise for a long evening in my apartment, the one with the sticky window and the original tile, the one I'd bought at 26 with money I'd saved from years of deliberate, careful work. And I realized that I had almost never let myself feel straightforwardly good about anything I'd achieved. Engineering degree. I remember thinking good, this justifies something, this makes the cost worth it. First promotion. She could have been vice president. The apartment itself. Maybe this balances something. Every victory had come with a footnote. Every success had been immediately conscripted into the argument for my existence. Do you know what it did to me, growing up hearing that my life was my fault? That she'd be happy, would have been more, could have had everything, if I hadn't been born? I spent my childhood apologizing for existing. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to justify my existence. And now, when I finally built something, she wants to take it as payment for the crime of being her child. That's not motherhood. That's billing. I thought about my boss, a mother of 3, director title, someone who navigated career and parenthood differently. Not easily, she told me once over coffee. There had been costs, adjustments, years when she'd felt pulled apart at the seams. But she had not, as far as I knew, spent years preparing an invoice for her children. I thought about my aunt, who built her own business while raising 2 kids. Different trade-offs, different sacrifices, different path. My mother's equation, motherhood ends career, full stop, and the debt belongs to the child, was not universal. It wasn't even the majority experience. It was a particular story my mother had built to explain a particular set of choices, and she'd spent 27 years making sure I understood that I was the cause. I built everything I have myself. Paid my own college loans. Bought my own car. Saved for my own apartment. The only thing she contributed financially was raising me, which is what parents do. It's not a capital investment expecting returns. It's parenthood. I don't owe dividends for being her child. I wrote all of this down. I wrote it for my therapist, and then I kept writing, because there turned out to be more of it than I'd realized. More grief, more stored-up guilt, more places where the stone had settled into my chest and I just accepted it as part of the landscape. Update 4. What mother actually lost. Here's the thing I've had to sit with, the hardest part of all of this. My mother isn't a villain. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier if she were. It would be simpler if the person who spent 27 years making me feel guilty for existing were someone I could cleanly resent. But she isn't that person. She's a woman who made a choice in her late 20s, genuinely believing in it, and then watched the years go by and found herself at 56 with a modest pension and a sense that something had been taken from her, and couldn't find anywhere to put that grief except in the direction of her son. The coordinator who became a mother. The ambition that didn't disappear but had no outlet. The divorce that stripped away the partnership that had at least shared the weight of the choice. She didn't invent the grief. The grief is real. She genuinely lost something. Maybe not the $2 million director career she'd built in her imagination, but something real. The version of herself that didn't detour. The professional identity she'd been building. The answer to the question, what would I have become? What she couldn't do, what I suspect she still can't fully do, is process that loss as hers. As a consequence of her own choices, her own trade-offs, her own life. Instead, she needed it to be someone else's fault. And I was the most available candidate. I talked to my therapist about this a lot. About the strange grief of seeing your parent clearly, not as a monster, not as a saint, but as a person who was hurt and handled it badly for a very long time. About the fact that understanding where someone's cruelty comes from doesn't obligate you to absorb it. You can have compassion for her loss, my therapist said, without accepting the invoice. I know, I said. I'm working on holding both things at once. The relatives had gotten involved by this point, the usual family system response to conflict, where everyone chooses a version of events to believe and then talks about it to everyone else. Some of them had heard my mother's framing, that I refused to help her, that I kept my apartment while she struggled. A few called to express concern, gentle in their approach but clearly troubled. I didn't engage in detail. I said, simply, that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, that I wished my mother well, and that I was not in a position to transfer my primary residence. Most of them seemed to understand there was a subtext. The ones who didn't, I couldn't control. Resolution. The list. It's been almost a year since the Sunday lunch when I finally said the things I'd been carrying for a decade. My mother and I speak. Not easily, not often, not with the full warmth that I used to hope we'd find someday. She still makes comments sometimes, glancing references to the career, to the apartment, to sacrifices unacknowledged. I deflect, redirect, keep the conversation moving. The relationship will not recover to something I don't think it was ever quite able to be. That's a grief of its own, one I'm also learning to carry without letting it become a stone. My therapist gave me a final assignment last month. She said, write down what you're proud of achieving. Just the list. No footnotes, no justifications, no attachment to what it cost anyone else or what it proves about the worthiness of your existence. Just the things you built and the fact that you built them. I sat in my apartment on a Tuesday evening, sticky window, original tile, the city noise coming up from the street below, and I wrote the list. Engineering degree. Paid for myself, over 5 years of work and loans I've since repaid. First real job. First promotion. The savings account that took 4 years of discipline to grow to something meaningful. This apartment, purchased at 26, mine without anyone's help, with a mortgage I can afford and a kitchen where I've cooked actual meals. A life. A real one, built from scratch, by me. I looked at the list for a long time. None of it came from my mother's sacrificed career. None of it was built on the foundation of her mythical director's salary or the $2 million she didn't earn. It came from my own work, yes, but I understood now that I had done that work partly to justify existing to someone who had made me feel like a burden from the time I could understand language. The accomplishments were mine. The drive behind them had partially been fear that I didn't deserve the life my existence had cost her and that I had to earn it back. I don't need to justify anymore. I exist. I'm allowed to. I didn't steal anything from anyone by being born into a world I didn't ask to enter. My mother made choices, real choices, voluntary ones, choices that had real costs, and she couldn't find a way to make peace with those costs, and so she sent the invoice to me. I understand the grief behind that. I do. But understanding it isn't the same as paying it. My mother spent 27 years telling me I stole her career by being born. She could have been a director, she said. She could have had millions, she said. Instead she had me, and I owed her for the loss. Then she asked for my apartment, $143,000 as partial payment for the $2 million career I cost her. But I didn't cost her anything. She chose to have me. She chose to stay home. She made her own decisions and then handed me the receipt. I don't owe her for being her child. I don't owe her for her choices. I don't owe her for the fantasy career that grew bigger every year in her resentful imagination, the coordinator who became the certain director, the encouraging boss who became the prophet of her executive destiny, the possible future that became an inevitable one and then became a $2 million invoice delivered to her son over pasta in his one-bedroom apartment. What I owe myself is freedom from the guilt she built into me, the sense that my existence was a burden, that my life came at the cost of hers, that every success I achieved was haunted by the ghost of what she could have been if I hadn't arrived. That guilt was the real bill she'd been preparing for 27 years. The apartment was just the final payment demand. I'm not paying. I'm keeping what I earned. I'm keeping what I built. And I'm letting go, slowly, imperfectly, in twice-weekly sessions with a therapist who lets me talk until I hear myself, of the debt I never actually incurred. The debt of being born to someone who couldn't stop counting what it cost her. Some mothers raise children and feel grateful. Some mothers raise children and keep a ledger. I know which kind I had. And I know, sitting here in my apartment with my list of things I built without anyone's help, exactly which kind of adult I'm going to be. One who doesn't bill anyone for my choices. One who doesn't invoice my existence. One who keeps his apartment and finally, stops apologizing for being alive. The apartment stays. The relationship is damaged. The guilt is finally being examined. The list is long, and it's mine.